Now, this technique is a little controversial, and that is why this is one of photography's best kept secrets. Have you ever seen an image and you couldn't quite work out how they managed to get that perspective? The foreground is so detailed and so large, but then the mountains in the background are also so dominant. And like, obviously in some locations, those perfect compositions do exist. However, maybe you've been to the location yourself and you've walked around with your wide angle lens and you've tried to get in as much detail as you can on the ground or in front of you, and then those mountains just shrink and you can't work out how it's done. But there might be more to it than you think. And there's a technique for that. This is perspective blending. So this morning I have set myself up on Vermilion Lakes here in Banff, and I'm actually on the second out of the 3 lakes, so the middle one. And this is a great little location throughout the whole of winter because there are kind of sulfur springs and methane hotspots that run into the lake here. So what you'll often find is no matter how cold it is, there'll often be open spots of water where you can get pretty amazing reflections at sunrise. But today I've opted not to do that because for this technique, it's probably better not to have a reflection. And you can see here I've got Mount Rundle just over here in the background. And then just in front of my camera here, I've got this kind of nice little ice formation with some good cracks and a little kind of dark spot. And I'm pretty close to that. So I want to get this foreground in nice and large, and I'm using a wide angle lens. But because of that, Mount Rundle is really small. So let me show you what I've got on my camera here. So this is the composition I have on the back of my camera at the moment, and you can see I've put this kind of ice formation leading right into the corners of the frame here, and I really like the detail that that's giving to the image. I'm shooting really wide here at about 16 millimeters, so it is elongating those sections coming right into the corner here, but as you can see, Mount Rundle is really small. And at the moment, there's not a lot going on in the sky, and there's a bit of dead space between this ice formation and the mountain. So this is when kind of perspective blending can come in useful. And in all honesty, that mountain looks a lot bigger to my eye right now than it does on camera. So I'm going to use perspective blending to maybe even shift that more to what I'm experiencing right now. But first things first, I'm going to take a couple pictures of the foreground and get that exposed properly. And I'm probably going to take a couple of pictures focused in different areas just to make sure this section that's coming right to the edge of the frame is nice and sharp. Right, I'm pretty happy with those foreground shots. I think it's going to be sharp from front to back. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the perspective a little bit. So I'm actually going to keep my tripod in the exact same spot, but I'm going to tilt it up a little bit and then zoom in to get a larger picture of Mount Rundle. Now on this new composition, you can just about see the foreground at the bottom of the frame here, but what you'll probably notice is that Mount Rundle is now much larger because I've zoomed in to about 35 millimeters, and having that mountain larger is exactly what I'm after. I'm going to hang around for a little bit here, I think, and just see if the light changes and gets any better here, and see if I can get a nicer picture of that larger Mount Rundle composition. But I'm not super hopeful we're going to get too much color or anything this morning, but for the purpose of this technique, I do have everything that I need. So now it's really just time to edit those together. However, before we do that, I have a bit of a question for you, or a bit of food for thought. So I think this technique is probably going to be pretty controversial. And there's going to be a lot of photographers out there that really don't like it, and in all honesty, probably see it as cheating a little bit. But let me ask you this. When we're out here kind of looking at a scene and looking at a landscape, we're processing the whole thing at once. And even looking through our eyes, we probably see the world in kind of the equivalent of somewhere between a 50mm and a 70mm lens in regards to kind of compression and perspective. So when I put that wide angle lens on a camera, it distorts reality further from the truth. And even though I can take a picture in one frame, it's stretching things at the edge of frame, and things in the center look much smaller than they are. And as I stand here, I can take in all the detail of all the ice formations on the lake, and I'm fully aware of the scale of Mount Rundle and it still looks really large. So in a way, this technique of combining those two perspectives maybe even shifts the image more to what I'm actually experiencing here in real life. I can appreciate the detail and I can appreciate the scale all in one go. So why not create an image that can also do that? But, you know, let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, for now, let's get back to the editing and I'll show you how to put these two together. Back at home now and back inside in the warm, and I've just pulled all of those pictures off of the camera and put them into Lightroom. But I've actually just selected just 3 of them that I'm going to use for this example. We've got 2 images for the foreground that are just focused in slightly different areas, so we'll focus stack that foreground together. And then I've got another image on a different perspective with Mount Rundle looking much larger and also focused on Mount Rundle. So I'm going to combine all 3 of those together in Photoshop in just a minute. But the first thing to do is to just give them all a little bit of an edit just to make them consistent across the 3 of them. I'm going to do things like change the white balance to make sure it matches across all 3 images, and as well as just pull up highlights and shadows up and down a little bit just to make sure it looks consistent and they blend together well. Right, so first things first here, I'm going to select all 3 of these images here and just adjust the white balance just a little bit just to make sure that all 3 images have the same white balance. And now I'm going to select the first 2 just after that, and I'm going to edit these together because they were taken just after one another. And I'm just going to take down the highlights a little bit here because they're a bit overexposed, and then bring up the shadows. Now on this 3rd image it does need to be just a little bit brighter, so I'm going to bring that exposure up just a little bit and also bring up those shadows just to make it kind of match the others. So maybe just a little bit brighter just for this purpose. Bring those highlights down as well to make sure they're not blown out. After I've done those adjustments, I'm just going to select all 3 images, right click them, and then I'm actually going to edit them in Adobe Photoshop, but I'm going to bring them in separately just because I think that might be a little bit easier to work with. So now I've got all 3 images here in Photoshop. The first thing I'm going to do is drag this image over to the other foreground image and focus stack those together. So it's easy enough to do this, just click and drag it into the other image up here, and then just make sure it aligns. Now firstly, I'm just going to make sure that these layers are lined up properly. Even though they were on a tripod, it's always good to double check this. So I'm going to select both the layers here in the layers panel. I'm going to go up to edit and then auto align layers. I'm going to make sure the auto projection is selected and just press OK. And that will just make sure that they're kind of pixel perfect and both aligned together there. Now I'm just going to add a mask to this top layer and use the gradient tool to blend the sharpest parts of each foreground layer together. Now to add in that other perspective. It's probably worth pointing out that this technique is much easier with images with a straight, clean horizon line, like you see here with the trees running across the ice. I'm simply going to select the portion of the image I want to move across, and then drag it on over. I'll then just place it where I think it makes sense, which is probably about here. I'm then going to crop in just a little bit to get rid of some of these unwanted edges. And now you can see how much of a difference that's made as I turn this top layer on and off. Now I'll sharpen up the image with a high pass filter layer and send it back into Lightroom for a few extra tweaks. And there we have it, the final image. So that's it. Like, it's a pretty simple technique, pretty easy to execute in the field and as well as edit them together, to be honest. But I know that will be pretty controversial. I think the finished result there looks more like I remember it at the time, but I know a lot of people won't agree with that technique. But let me know what you think in the comments. And once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch one of my videos. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. I'll be making a few more tutorials in the future, and also lots of content to come from the Canadian Rockies here. So hopefully I will see you on the next one.